My son and his wife announced at Christmas dinner they were cutting me off financially. They called it tough love. I smiled and handed them an envelope. When they opened it the next morning, their faces went white. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant giving everything and expecting nothing in return. I believed that love was measured in sacrifice, that family came before everything else, and that if you worked hard enough and loved deeply enough, everything would turn out okay. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I was before everything fell apart. I was a nurse for 42 years. I worked the night shift at County General Hospital, the shift nobody wanted because it meant missing dinners and birthdays and normal life. But it paid a little more, and I needed every extra dollar. My husband Tom was a good man, a construction worker with rough hands and a gentle heart. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We had a small house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and looked out for each other. We had one son, David, and he was our entire world. When Tom died 10 years ago from a sudden heart attack, something inside me broke. But I couldn't fall apart because David needed me. He was in his late 20s then, trying to start his own financial advisory business, and I wanted to make sure he had every advantage I never had. So I worked longer hours. I took out a second mortgage on the house. I gave him $50,000 from Tom's life insurance to help him get established. I didn't think twice about it. That's what mothers do. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner. I wore the same winter coat for a decade because it still kept me warm. I bought generic brands at the grocery store and clipped coupons like my life depended on it. But David had the best of everything. Private college education with no student loans, a reliable car, a down payment for his first house that I scraped together by working double shifts until my feet swelled and my back screamed. I never asked him to pay me back. I never expected anything except maybe a phone call on Sundays and the chance to watch him build a good life. Everyone in our neighborhood knew me as the nice lady who brought casseroles when someone was sick and who always had her Christmas lights up first. I volunteered at St. Mary's Church every Saturday sorting donations and helping with the food pantry. I had a small garden where I grew tomatoes and roses, and I spent my evenings knitting blankets for the babies in the hospital NICU where I used to work. My life was simple, quiet, and full of small joys. When David married Jessica 3 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. She came from money, from a family with vacation homes and country club memberships, and I could tell she wasn't comfortable with my modest lifestyle. But I figured love would bridge that gap. I figured we'd become close eventually. I was the kind of mother-in-law who never interfered, never criticized, and always smiled even when Jessica made comments about my outdated furniture or my old-fashioned cooking. I was kind. I was humble. I was selfless to a fault, and that, I would learn, made me the perfect victim. Before everything went wrong, my life had a comforting rhythm to it, like the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in my hallway. I woke up every morning at 6:30, made myself a cup of coffee with too much cream and not enough sugar, and sat on my back porch watching the sun rise over my garden. Those quiet moments were sacred to me. The world felt peaceful then, full of possibility and hope. My Sundays were the highlight of my week. I would start cooking around noon, preparing a feast that took hours but filled my home with warmth and delicious smells. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the way Tom used to love it. Homemade dinner rolls that I'd learned to make from my own mother. Green bean casserole with the crispy onions on top. And always, an apple pie for dessert, because it was David's favorite, since he was 5 years old. David and Jessica would arrive around 4 o'clock. I'd set my dining table with the good china, the set with the tiny blue flowers around the edges that had been my grandmother's. I'd put out cloth napkins and light candles, even though Jessica once told me it was unnecessary for a casual family dinner. But to me, it wasn't casual. It was everything. It was the reason I worked all those years. It was the proof that all the sacrifice had been worth it. During those dinners, I'd ask David about his work, and his eyes would light up as he told me about his clients and his growing business. I didn't always understand the financial terms he used, but I loved watching him talk about something he was passionate about. He'd lean back in his chair the same way Tom used to, one hand gesturing animatedly while the other reached for another dinner roll. In those moments, I could see the little boy who used to sit at that same table doing his homework while I cooked dinner after my hospital shift. Jessica would usually sit quietly, scrolling through her phone or picking at her food. She rarely ate much of what I made, often mentioning she was watching her carbs or had already eaten a late lunch. I tried not to let it hurt my feelings. Different people show love in different ways, I told myself. Maybe she wasn't comfortable yet. Maybe she just needed more time to warm up to me. After dinner, we'd move to the living room. I'd serve coffee and pie, and sometimes David would tell me stories about his childhood that made us both laugh. Remember when I tried to dye my hair with Kool-Aid for that school dance? Remember when I accidentally broke Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball and you made me work in her garden all summer to pay for it? Those memories felt like treasures I could hold in my hands. On weekday evenings, I kept myself busy with my routines. I'd work in my garden, pulling weeds and talking to my roses like they were old friends. I'd walk to the corner store and chat with Mr. Patterson, who'd owned it for 30 years. I'd attend my church activities and knit in front of the television, usually watching old game shows or cooking programs. My neighbor, Martha, would come over for tea on Wednesday afternoons, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. My life wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was mine. It was built on years of hard work and love. My little house held 40 years of memories in its walls. Everything was exactly where it should be. I felt safe. I felt content. I felt like I had done everything right. I had no idea a storm was coming that would tear it all apart. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Sunday in late June. David called that morning, just as I was pulling the pot roast from the oven, and told me they couldn't make it to dinner. His voice sounded rushed, distracted. "Something came up with Jessica's family," he said. "Her mom needs help with some things. Rain check?" I tried to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Of course, sweetheart. Family comes first." I hung up and stared at the table I'd already set, at the food I'd spent hours preparing, and felt a small knot form in my stomach. It was the third Sunday in a row they'd canceled, but I pushed the feeling away. They were busy. They had their own lives. This was normal. The cancellations became more frequent as summer turned to fall. When they did come over, something felt different. David would sit at my table, but his mind seemed miles away. His phone would buzz constantly, and he'd glance at it with a worried expression before silencing it and mumbling an apology. Jessica barely pretended to be interested anymore. She'd answer my questions with one or two words, her eyes glazed over with boredom. One evening in September, I was clearing dishes when I heard them talking in the hallway. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was simply walking from the kitchen to the dining room when Jessica's sharp whisper stopped me in my tracks. "We can't keep doing this every week. It's exhausting." David's voice was lower, harder to hear. "I know, but she's my mom. What am I supposed to do?" "Set boundaries. We have our own life to think about. She expects too much." I stood there frozen, holding a stack of plates, my heart pounding. Expects too much? I never asked them for anything. All I wanted was a few hours on Sunday. Was that really too much? I forced myself to walk into the room, making noise so they'd know I was coming. They immediately stopped talking and plastered on fake smiles. The rest of the evening felt strained and artificial. I tried to convince myself I'd misunderstood. Maybe Jessica was talking about her own mother. Maybe I'd heard wrong. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew a little more each day. In October, my kitchen faucet started leaking. Water dripped steadily into the sink, and no matter how tightly I turned the handle, it wouldn't stop. The sound kept me awake at night, a constant reminder that things were falling apart in more ways than one. I called David on a Tuesday afternoon trying to sound casual and not needy. "Hey honey, I hate to bother you, but my faucet is leaking pretty badly. Do you think you could come by this weekend and take a look? Your dad always handled these things, and I'm not sure what to do." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Too long. When David finally spoke, his tone was clipped, almost irritated. "Mom, I'm really swamped with work right now. Can't you just call a plumber?" "Well, I could, but you know how expensive they are. I'm trying to watch my spending, and I thought maybe, I really don't have time for this right now. Just hire someone. I've got to go." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, staring at it like it had betrayed me. David had never spoken to me like that before. Never brushed me off so coldly. Never made me feel like I was an inconvenience, a burden. That night, I lay awake listening to the drip, drip, drip of the faucet. Each drop echoed in the silence like a warning. Something was wrong. Something had changed. And deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew it was only going to get worse. I spent the next few weeks doing what I did best, making excuses and convincing myself everything was fine. Every time doubt crept into my mind, I pushed it away like an unwanted visitor at the door. I had raised David. I knew him. He was a good boy, a good man. There had to be a reasonable explanation for his behavior. When Martha came over for our Wednesday tea, she mentioned seeing David and Jessica at Romano's, the expensive Italian restaurant downtown. "They looked so fancy," she said, stirring honey into her cup. "Must have been celebrating something special." My heart sank a little. David hadn't mentioned any celebration to me, but I immediately jumped to his defense. "Oh, they work so hard. They deserve to treat themselves once in a while. David's business has been doing really well." Martha gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "You're a good mother, Margaret. Too good sometimes." I didn't know what she meant by that, and I didn't want to. Instead, I changed the subject to the church bake sale and pretended everything was normal. The following Sunday, I decided not to cook our usual big dinner. Maybe I had been putting too much pressure on them. Maybe Jessica was right and I was expecting too much. So I called David and suggested we just have a simple meal, maybe order pizza. "Whatever's easiest for you guys," I said, trying to sound breezy and casual. "Actually, Mom, we're going to skip this week too. We've just got a lot going on." "Oh, okay. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. We're just busy. You understand, right?" "Of course I understand," I said quickly, too quickly. "You kids have your own life. Don't worry about me." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and gave myself a stern talking to. I was being that mother, the clingy one, the overbearing one, the type who couldn't let go and let her child live his own life. I had promised myself when David got married that I would never be the mother-in-law who interfered or demanded too much attention. And here I was, getting upset because they couldn't come to dinner every single week. How selfish of me. My neighbor, Mr. Chen, noticed I was struggling to carry groceries from my car one afternoon and offered to help. As we walked to my door, he asked why David didn't come around much anymore. "He used to mow your lawn every other week. Now I see you out here pushing that heavy mower yourself." I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Oh, he's just busy with work. He's building his career. That's more important than yard work. I'm perfectly capable of doing it myself anyway. Keeps me active." Mr. Chen nodded but didn't look convinced. I could see the concern in his eyes, and it made me uncomfortable. I didn't want people pitying me or thinking badly of David. I started declining invitations to talk about my personal life. When people asked about David at church, I'd smile brightly and say everything was wonderful. When my sister called from Arizona and asked if something was wrong because I sounded sad, I laughed it off. "I'm just tired from gardening," I told her. "Everything's perfect." At night, alone in my house, I'd look at old photographs. David as a baby in my arms, David on his first bicycle, David in his graduation cap and gown. This was my son. The boy I'd nursed through every fever, helped with every homework assignment, cheered for at every baseball game. He loved me. I was certain of it. The distance was temporary. Marriage was an adjustment. Jessica needed time to get comfortable. Things would go back to normal eventually. I just needed to be patient and understanding. I repeated these thoughts like a prayer, desperately hoping that if I believed them hard enough, they would become true. It was a cold Tuesday morning in early November when my world tilted on its axis. I was still in my bathrobe, sipping coffee and watching the morning news, when I heard the mailman's truck pull up outside. I wasn't expecting anything important, just the usual bills and grocery store flyers. But when I opened my mailbox, there was a thick envelope marked certified mail with a return address from Whitmore and Associates, attorneys at law. My hands started trembling before I even opened it. Nobody sends certified letters with good news. I stood right there on my front porch, my fingers fumbling with the envelope, my breath coming short and fast. The morning air was crisp and cold, but I barely felt it. All I could focus on was getting that envelope open. The letterhead was expensive looking, embossed with gold lettering. Very official, very intimidating. I started reading, and with each word, my heart dropped further into my stomach. Dear Mrs. Margaret Thornton, we are writing on behalf of our clients, Mr. David Thornton and Mrs. Jessica Thornton, to formally request that you cease and desist from requesting financial assistance from our clients. Repeated requests for monetary support have placed undue burden on our clients' finances and personal lives. Any future requests for financial assistance will be ignored. Our clients wish to establish clear boundaries regarding financial matters going forward. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, then a 5th. The words blurred together as my eyes filled with tears. Financial assistance? Repeated requests? What were they talking about? I had never asked David for money, not once, not ever. The very idea was absurd, insulting, completely backward. Just last year, I had given them $5,000 to help furnish their home office. Before that, the down payment on their house. Before that, the $50,000 to start his business. The flow of money had always gone in one direction, from me to them. Always. I had bank statements to prove it. I had canceled checks. I had everything documented because I'd been a nurse long enough to know you always keep records. I rushed inside, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial David's number. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. David, it's Mom. I just received a very strange letter from a lawyer. Please call me back right away. I need to understand what's going on. I tried again an hour later. Voicemail. I tried at lunch. Voicemail. I tried mid-afternoon. Voicemail. Each time my anxiety grew. My son was deliberately avoiding me. That hurt almost as much as the letter itself. Finally, at 8 o'clock that evening, my phone buzzed with a text message. Just a text. Not even a phone call. Mom, we need boundaries. Please respect our decision. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Boundaries? What decision? I immediately tried to call him back, but this time the phone didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. He had blocked me. Or turned off his phone. Either way, the message was clear. He didn't want to talk to me. I sat at my kitchen table until well past midnight. The lawyer's letter spread out in front of me, reading it over and over again. I analyzed every word, every phrase, searching for some explanation that would make this make sense. But there wasn't one. This was deliberate. This was calculated. This was a lie designed to paint me as some kind of financial leech. Someone was poisoning my son's mind against me. Someone was rewriting history, turning my generosity into dependency, my love into burden. And David was letting it happen. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every interaction, every moment from the past 6 months. The evidence was right there in front of me now, undeniable and devastating. Something was very, very wrong. and I could no longer pretend otherwise. Christmas arrived like a storm cloud on the horizon. Despite everything, despite the lawyer's letter and the weeks of silence, I clung to hope like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. This was Christmas. This was family. Surely we could work things out face to face. Surely David would see reason once we talked properly. I spent 2 full days preparing the perfect Christmas dinner. I roasted a 20-pound turkey until the skin was golden and crispy. I made homemade stuffing with sage and cranberries, sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow topping David loved, green beans, almondine, dinner rolls from scratch, and my famous apple pie. I set the table with my best china, the pieces that had belonged to my grandmother. I hung evergreen garland and lit cinnamon-scented candles. I wanted everything to be perfect. I needed everything to be perfect. When David and Jessica arrived at 5 o'clock, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Jessica walked in, wearing a designer dress and heels that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She barely glanced at me, didn't return my hug, and sat down at the table with her arms crossed like a prisoner being forced to attend her own trial. David wouldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled a hello and immediately pulled out his phone. I tried. God knows I tried. I served the food with shaking hands and asked about their work, their plans for the new year, how they were doing. Jessica gave one-word answers. David said fine to everything. The silence between my questions was suffocating. We were 20 minutes into the most uncomfortable meal of my life when Jessica suddenly put down her fork with a loud clank. "We need to talk about something," she announced, her voice sharp and rehearsed. I looked up, hopeful despite everything. Maybe this was it. Maybe we'd finally clear the air. Of course. I want to talk too. I want to understand. Jessica cut me off. "Margaret, David, and I have made a decision. We're cutting you off financially. No more helping you with bills. No more bailing you out. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet and stop depending on us." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Bailing you out? Jessica, I've never asked you for anything. It's tough love, Mom." David's voice was cold, mechanical, like he was reciting lines someone else had written. "You've become too dependent on us. Jessica and I need to focus on our future, on starting our own family. We can't keep supporting you." Tears burned in my eyes. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. "David, I gave you everything. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I gave you money for your house, for your business. I've never asked for anything back, not once." Jessica rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes at me. "That was your choice, Margaret. We didn't ask you to do any of that. You can't hold your choices over our heads forever." "I'm not holding anything?" My voice cracked. "I just want to understand where this is coming from. Why are you lying about me asking for money?" David finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. There was no warmth there, no love, no recognition of everything I'd sacrificed, just cold indifference and something worse, resentment. "We're not discussing this anymore," he said flatly. "This is our decision and it's final. You need to accept it and move on." Jessica stood up. "I think we should go. This is clearly getting too emotional." I sat there frozen, watching my son and his wife prepare to walk out of my house and my life. The betrayal was complete, total, devastating. Everything I'd believed about family, about love, about sacrifice had been a lie. I couldn't just sit there and let them see me fall apart. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I need to check on the pie," I mumbled, pushing my chair back and practically fleeing to the kitchen. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me. I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles white, trying to catch my breath. Tears streamed down my face, but I forced myself to be silent. I would not sob. I would not break down where they could hear me. That's when I heard their voices drifting from the dining room. They thought I was far enough away. They thought I couldn't hear them. But the old house carried sound through the vents and thin walls, and their whispers reached me clear as day. Do you think she bought it? Jessica's voice was eager, excited even. I don't know, she seemed pretty shocked. David sounded uncertain, guilty maybe. Well, she needs to believe it. Once she signs the house over to us, we can finally get the equity we need for the Riverside investment property. Your mother's sitting on $300,000 in equity doing absolutely nothing with it. My blood turned to ice. The Riverside property. They wanted my house. The house Tom and I bought 40 years ago. The house where I raised David. The house that held every memory of my marriage, my life, my entire existence. The lawyer said we have to establish a pattern first, remember? David's voice was quieter now, but I heard every single word. We need documentation that she's financially irresponsible, that she can't manage on her own. That's why we needed this conversation on record. I've been keeping notes of every interaction, building the case. Good, Jessica said. Once we have enough documentation, we can petition for conservatorship. Your uncle did it with his mother last year, got control of everything. She didn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. I still feel weird about this. David's voice wavered slightly. Oh, please don't go soft on me now. She guilt-tripped you your entire life with all that "I sacrificed everything" nonsense. She chose to work those jobs. She chose to give you money. That's on her. Now it's time for us to think about our future. We deserve that house more than she does. She's one person living in a 4-bedroom home. It's wasteful. You're right, David said, and hearing him agree broke something fundamental inside me. We'll stick to the plan. Keep documenting everything. Make sure everyone knows she's asking us for money. Build the narrative. Exactly. And keep your distance. The lawyer said the more we can show a pattern of her being demanding and needy, the stronger our case. Oh, and I talked to that real estate agent. He said once we get the house, we're looking at a quick sale. The market's hot in this neighborhood. They were planning to sell it. Not even keep it. Just take it from me and sell it like it meant nothing. Like 40 years of memories could be erased with a signature and a for sale sign. I stood there in my kitchen, one hand pressed against my mouth to keep from screaming, the other clutching the counter so hard my fingers ached. This wasn't just about cutting me off. This wasn't about boundaries or tough love or any of the lies they'd been feeding me. This was theft. This was elder abuse. This was a calculated, premeditated conspiracy to steal everything I had. And my own son, the baby I'd held in my arms, was orchestrating it all. The worst part? They had underestimated me completely. They thought I was a helpless old woman who would simply roll over and let them take everything. They thought I was too naive, too trusting, too weak to fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. And that, I realized with cold clarity, would be their biggest mistake. David and Jessica left abruptly 20 minutes later. I heard Jessica's sharp voice saying something about not wanting to deal with this drama, and then the front door slammed shut. The sound echoed through my empty house like a gunshot. I heard their car start, heard the engine fade into the distance, and only then did I allow myself to completely fall apart. I collapsed onto my living room floor, my body shaking with sobs so violent I thought I might be sick. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except cry and cry and cry until my throat was raw and my chest ached. The Christmas tree lights blurred into streaks of color through my tears. The house that had always felt warm and safe now felt like a tomb. How had it come to this? How had my beautiful son, the child I'd carried for 9 months and loved for 38 years, turned into someone I didn't recognize? Someone who could plot to steal my home, who could lie about me to lawyers and build false cases, who could sit at my table and pretend while planning my destruction? The memories came flooding back, each one a knife to my heart. I remembered being 8 months pregnant, standing on swollen feet for 12-hour shifts at the hospital because we needed the money for the baby's room. I remembered David's first day of kindergarten, how he'd cried and clung to my leg, and how I'd held him and promised I'd always protect him. I remembered the year he wanted to go to space camp, but we couldn't afford it, so I worked overtime for 3 months straight, sleeping 4 hours a night until I had enough saved. I remembered his face Christmas morning when I told him he could go. Pure joy, pure love. I remembered missing his baseball games because I was working, missing school plays, missing parent nights, all so he could have new cleats, a good glove, a future. I remembered the night Tom died, how David had held me while I sobbed, how he'd whispered, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of you now, I promise." That promise felt like dust in my hands now. I crawled to the couch and pulled down the photo album from the bookshelf. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. David as a newborn, tiny and perfect. David learning to ride a bike, missing his 2 front teeth. David at his high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders. David at his wedding, kissing my cheek. In every single photo, I looked at him with absolute adoration, with complete trust, with unconditional love. And all of it, every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of putting his needs before my own, had led me here, to this moment, alone on my couch, with a son who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his real estate ambitions. I thought about Tom. God, I missed him so much it physically hurt. If he were here, he'd know what to do. He'd protect me. He'd talk sense into David. He'd never let this happen. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into the empty room. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect what we built. I'm so sorry our son turned out like this." The clock on the mantel chimed midnight. Technically, it was the day after Christmas now. I sat in the darkness of my living room, surrounded by the ruins of the perfect dinner I'd prepared, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. I had given everything, and it hadn't been enough. It had never been enough. I was a fool, a naive, trusting, ridiculous fool who'd believed that love and sacrifice mattered. I'd believed family meant something. I'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. For hours I cried. I grieved not just for what I was losing, but for what had never really existed in the first place. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift as car headlights occasionally passed by outside. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, as the darkest part of night began surrendering to dawn, something inside me shifted. I got up and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the light and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen and red. My face was pale and drawn. My hair was a mess. I looked exactly like what David and Jessica thought I was, a weak, pathetic old woman who could be manipulated and discarded. But as I stared at my reflection, something hardened in my chest. A spark of anger began to glow, small at first, then growing hotter and brighter with each passing second. Who was I? I was Margaret Thornton. I had survived 42 years as a nurse in one of the busiest hospitals in the state. I had dealt with life and death decisions. I had held dying patients' hands and talked frantic family members through impossible choices. I had worked through exhaustion, through grief, through pain that would have broken lesser people. I had raised a child alone after my husband died. I had managed finances, repairs, emergencies, and everything else life threw at me without falling apart. I had built a life through sheer determination and grit. I was not weak. I was not helpless. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let my ungrateful son and his scheming wife steal everything I'd worked for. The woman in the mirror straightened her shoulders, her jaw set. Her eyes, though still red, now held something dangerous, something they should have been afraid of. I walked downstairs to my kitchen and made a pot of coffee. Strong coffee. The kind that tastes like bitter determination. As the sun began to rise, painting my kitchen in shades of gold and pink, I sat down at my table with a notepad and a pen. My hands were steady now. My mind was clear. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it no longer controlled me. I started making a list. Everything I knew, everything I'd heard, everything I had access to. 42 years as a nurse had taught me the importance of documentation, of building an airtight case, of having evidence that couldn't be disputed. I knew how to be methodical. I knew how to be thorough. And I knew how to fight. David and Jessica had made several critical mistakes. First, they had underestimated me completely. They saw an old woman who baked pies and knitted blankets. They didn't see the steel spine underneath. Second, they had gotten greedy and impatient. They'd shown their hand too early with that lawyer's letter and the Christmas confrontation. And third, they had no idea what I had in my possession. I got up and walked to my home office, a small room that had once been David's bedroom. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I hadn't looked at in years. Inside was a promissory note signed by David, dated 10 years ago. $50,000 loaned to start his business, to be repaid with interest. I had never intended to collect. It was supposed to be a gift to help my son succeed, but a gift given under false pretenses could be reclaimed, and a legal document was a legal document. I allowed myself a small, cold smile as I held that piece of paper. They wanted to play legal games? Fine. I'd been in the medical field long enough to know that the best defense was a good offense. They thought they were hunting a helpless deer. They were about to discover they'd cornered a wolf. Over the next 3 days, I barely slept. But this time, it wasn't from grief. It was from purpose. I moved through my house like a woman possessed, gathering every piece of evidence I could find, building a case so airtight that even the best lawyer in the country couldn't poke holes in it. My first call was to Robert Chambers, my late husband's best friend. Robert had been a defense attorney for 35 years before retiring. He and Tom used to play poker every Thursday night. When Tom died, Robert had told me that if I ever needed anything at all, I should call him. I'd never taken him up on that offer, until now. Margaret? His voice was warm when he answered. It's been too long. How are you? I need your help, Robert. Legal help. My voice was steady, businesslike. And I need you to listen to everything before you say anything. I told him everything. The lawyer's letter, the Christmas dinner confrontation, the conversation I'd overheard about taking my house. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Those bastards, he finally said, his voice hard. Margaret, what they're attempting is called elder financial abuse. It's a felony in this state. But we need to be smart about this. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning and bring every financial document you have? I arrived at Robert's office at 9 o'clock sharp with 2 boxes of files, bank statements going back 15 years, canceled checks, tax returns, every piece of paper that proved I had given money to David, not the other way around. Robert went through everything methodically, making notes, occasionally shaking his head in disgust. "This is even better than I thought," he said. "You have documentation of every dollar you gave him. The down payment on his house, the business loan, the furniture money, and there's not a single shred of evidence that you ever asked him for anything." "There's more," I said, and handed him the promissory note. Robert's eyes widened as he read it. He pulled out a calculator and started working. "Margaret, with 10 years of compound interest at the rate specified in this note, David currently owes you $87,400. I felt a grim satisfaction. I never intended to collect, but circumstances have changed. They certainly have. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm drafting a formal demand for repayment of this loan. Second, we're filing a cease and desist against them for the false claims of financial dependency. Third, I'm reporting that lawyer who sent you the intimidation letter to the State Bar Association. That letter violated multiple ethics rules." Over the next few days, Robert helped me create an ironclad trust protecting my house and assets from any claims. We gathered character witnesses, neighbors, church members, My former colleagues from the hospital, all willing to testify to my mental competence and financial independence. But I didn't stop there. I went to an electronics store and bought a small recording device. I installed security cameras in my living room and dining room. If David and Jessica were documenting everything to build their false case, I would document the truth. I created a detailed timeline of events, complete with dates, times, and witnesses. I printed out emails and text messages. I got statements from my bank showing my financial stability, and then I prepared the envelope. The envelope that would contain every piece of evidence, every legal document, every truth they'd tried to bury. I sealed it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. When I called David and Jessica for a family meeting to discuss their concerns, my voice was calm and accommodating. They thought I was ready to surrender. They had no idea I was setting a trap. The hunter had become the hunted, and they were walking straight into my crosshairs. I chose New Year's Day for the meeting. There was something poetic about it. A new year, a new beginning, the end of one chapter and the start of another. I called David on December 30th, keeping my voice soft and defeated, exactly what they expected to hear. David, I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas. You're right. I need to be more independent. Can you and Jessica come over tomorrow? I want to discuss things properly. I want to find a solution that works for everyone. I could hear the relief in his voice. Really? Yeah, Mom, of course. That sounds good. We'll be there around 2 o'clock. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, letting my voice crack just slightly. The performance was almost too easy. I spent New Year's Day preparing. Not food this time, though I did make tea and put out some store-bought cookies. This wasn't about hospitality. This was about ending a war. I dressed carefully in a simple navy blue dress, practical shoes, my hair neatly styled. I wanted to look composed, dignified, unbreakable. At exactly 2 o'clock, David's car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched them sit there for a moment. Jessica checking her makeup in the mirror, David taking a deep breath like he was preparing for battle. They had no idea the battle was already over. When I opened the door, Jessica swept in wearing designer sunglasses and carrying an expensive handbag. David followed, his expression cautious but hopeful. They thought they'd won. It was written all over their faces. Come in, sit down, I said calmly, gesturing to the living room. I made tea. We sat in uncomfortable silence as I poured. My hands were perfectly steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. Jessica kept glancing at David with barely concealed excitement. They thought this was it. They thought I was about to surrender my house, my dignity, my entire life. So, Jessica said, unable to contain herself any longer, have you thought about what we discussed at Christmas? I have, I said evenly. I've thought about very little else, actually. But before we get into that, I'd like to understand exactly what you want from me. I want everything clear. David shifted uncomfortably, but Jessica had no such hesitation. She pulled a document from her handbag with the efficiency of a corporate executioner. We've had our lawyer draw this up. It's a power of attorney agreement that gives us control over your financial decisions. And this, she slid another paper across the coffee table, is a proposal for you to transfer the house into a family trust that David and I would manage. I picked up the documents and read them slowly, carefully, my face neutral. Inside, my blood was boiling, but outside, I remained calm as stone. These papers would give them everything. My house, my bank accounts, my entire life savings. They would have complete control, and I would have nothing. I see, I said quietly. I set the papers down and looked at them both. Jessica was practically vibrating with anticipation. David still couldn't meet my eyes. Before I make any decisions, I have something for you. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the thick manila envelope. Both of them stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. What is it? Jessica asked suspiciously. It's my answer, I said, holding it out to them. But I need you to promise me something. Don't open it until tomorrow morning. Can you do that for me?" David finally looked at me, confused. "Why tomorrow?" "Because I want you to have tonight to enjoy your victory," I said with a small smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Tomorrow, everything changes." Jessica snatched the envelope from my hand, turning it over in her fingers like she was inspecting it for traps. "This better not be some guilt trip manipulation," she muttered. "Just open it tomorrow," I repeated. "I promise it will answer all your questions." They left 15 minutes later, Jessica clutching the envelope like it was a prize she'd won. Through my window, I watched them sitting in the car, Jessica shaking the envelope, clearly debating whether to open it right then. But David said something, and they finally drove away. Good. They'd kept their promise. Not that it mattered. Tomorrow would come either way. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I imagined them at their breakfast table. I imagined Jessica's perfectly manicured nails tearing open the envelope. I imagined their faces as they pulled out the documents one by one. First, the formal legal notice demanding immediate repayment of $87,400 for the business loan David had signed for. Second, the cease and desist order warning them that any further attempts at elder financial abuse would result in criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. Third, a complete transcript of their Christmas dinner conversation, including every word about stealing my house and building a false case against me. Fourth, a copy of my complaint to the State Bar Association against their lawyer for ethical violations. Fifth, my new trust documents making it legally impossible for them to touch any of my assets. But the final document was the masterpiece. An invitation to a family gathering that evening at the community center. Margaret Thornton cordially invites family and friends to an important announcement at 6 o'clock. I had rented the community center's main hall. I'd called every relative, every neighbor, every church member, every person who mattered in our social circle. "It's about my future," I'd told them. "I need everyone there." 63 people had confirmed they'd attend. At 5:30 that evening, I arrived early to set up. Robert helped me connect my laptop to the projector. We tested the sound system. Everything was perfect. People started arriving at 5:45. David's aunts and uncles, my sister who'd flown in from Arizona, neighbors from my street, church friends, former colleagues from the hospital. The room filled with familiar faces, all of them confused but curious. At exactly 6 o'clock, David and Jessica burst through the doors. Their faces were pale, panicked. They'd clearly spent the day trying to figure out how to stop this, but they were too late. "Mom, don't do this," David said, his voice desperate. "Please, we can talk about this privately." "No," I said calmly, standing at the front of the room. "We're done talking privately. Everyone, please take your seats." For the next 30 minutes, I presented my case like the professional I'd always been, calm, organized, methodical. I started by explaining that I'd asked everyone here to witness the truth about a situation that had been misrepresented. Then I played the recording from Christmas dinner. The room sat in horrified silence as Jessica's voice rang out. "We're cutting you off financially." As David's voice said, "It's tough love, Mom." But the real gasps came when I played the conversation they'd had after, thinking I couldn't hear. Jessica's voice crystal clear. "Once she signs the house over to us, we can finally get the equity we need." David's voice. "We have to establish a pattern first, build the case that she's financially irresponsible." The silence that followed was deafening. The room erupted. David's Aunt Patricia started crying. His Uncle James stood up, his face red with fury, and pointed at David. "You were going to steal your mother's house? The house your father worked himself to death to pay for? What kind of monster are you?" Jessica tried to defend herself, her voice shrill and desperate. "You don't understand. She's manipulating all of you. This is taken out of context." "Context?" My sister Rachel's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "What context makes it okay to plot stealing from your own mother?" I wasn't finished. I pulled up my presentation slides on the projector, bank statements showing every dollar I'd given David over the years. The $50,000 check for his business, the down payment for his house, the $5,000 for furniture, transaction after transaction, all flowing in one direction, from me to him. Then I showed the lawyer's letter claiming I had repeatedly asked them for financial assistance. Can anyone here, anyone at all, remember a single time I asked David for money? I looked around the room. Silence. Then heads shaking. No one could because it had never happened. Mrs. Patterson from the church stood up. Margaret brings meals to shut-ins every week with her own money. Last month, she paid for the Johnson family's heating bill when Mr. Johnson was laid off. My neighbor, Mr. Chen, raised his hand. She's been mowing her own lawn for months because David stopped coming around. She never once complained or asked him for help. One by one, people shared stories of my independence, my generosity, my strength. Each testimony was another nail in David and Jessica's coffin. Jessica's face had gone from red to white. She grabbed her purse and tried to leave, but her path was blocked by angry relatives demanding answers. David finally broke down. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, his whole body shaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Jessica said it was a good investment opportunity. She said you didn't need such a big house. She said we deserved it more. I didn't want to hurt you. I'm so sorry." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, and felt nothing but cold disappointment. You're sorry you got caught, David. Not sorry for what you tried to do. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within a week, word had spread throughout their social and professional circles. Jessica's wealthy parents were mortified. They'd built their reputation on family values and charitable work, and their daughter had just been exposed as someone who tried to steal from an elderly widow. They cut her off financially, refusing to speak to her until she fixed the disgrace she'd brought on the family name. David's financial advisory business collapsed even faster. 3 of his biggest clients pulled their accounts within 48 hours, citing concerns about his ethical judgment and character. Others followed. He received a formal investigation notice from the State Financial Regulatory Board. Several former clients filed complaints questioning whether someone who would defraud his own mother could be trusted with their retirement funds. The lawyer who'd sent me the intimidation letter received a formal reprimand from the State Bar Association and was required to complete ethics training. The firm quietly asked him to resign to avoid further embarrassment. David and Jessica were forced to liquidate assets to repay me the $87,000 they owed. They sold Jessica's Mercedes. They sold the expensive furniture I'd helped them buy. They canceled their country club membership and the vacation home rental they'd been planning. The Riverside investment property they'd dreamed of buying with my house's equity went to another buyer. Meanwhile, my life transformed in ways I hadn't expected. The family members who'd witnessed everything rallied around me with fierce protectiveness. My nephew Michael, who was a contractor, insisted on fixing everything in my house that needed repair, refusing to accept payment. "You paid for my wedding when I was broke, Aunt Margaret. This is me paying it forward." My niece Sarah started visiting every Sunday for the dinner tradition David had abandoned. She brought her 2 young daughters, and my house filled with laughter and the sound of children playing again. The church community embraced me as a hero. I'd stood up for myself, and in doing so, I'd inspired other elderly members who'd been silently suffering similar abuse from their own families. 3 of them came forward with their stories, and Robert helped them pro bono. I used some of the repayment money to finally treat myself. I bought a reliable new car, a modest but comfortable sedan that didn't break down every other month. I renovated my kitchen with modern appliances. I booked a trip to Ireland, something Tom and I had always dreamed of doing but never could afford. For the first time in my adult life, I put myself first, and it felt liberating. 6 months after that fateful New Year's Day, I found myself standing in my garden on a beautiful spring morning. The roses I'd planted years ago were blooming in brilliant shades of red and pink. The sun was warm on my face. Birds sang in the trees. Everything felt different now, lighter, freer, like I'd been carrying a tremendous weight for decades and had finally set it down. I thought about the woman I'd been at Christmas, the woman who would have done anything to keep the peace, who would have sacrificed everything to maintain a relationship with her son, even if it meant giving up her home, her security, her dignity. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that love should never require you to destroy yourself. The truth I'd learned, the truth that came at such a painful cost, was this: sacrifice without boundaries isn't love. It's self-destruction. For years, I'd believed that being a good mother meant giving endlessly, asking for nothing, accepting. Whatever scraps of affection came my way, I'd believed that putting myself last was noble, that suffering in silence was virtuous, that tolerating mistreatment was the price of maintaining family harmony. I was wrong. Real love, healthy love, is built on mutual respect. It's a two-way street where both people give and both people receive. It doesn't require one person to be diminished so another can be elevated. It doesn't demand that you accept abuse, manipulation, or exploitation. And it certainly doesn't ask you to hand over everything you've worked for to people who see you as nothing more than a resource to be drained. Greed is a poison that can corrupt even the closest relationships. I watched it transform my son from the boy who once promised to take care of me into a man willing to lie, cheat, and steal from his own mother. Jessica's influence played a role, certainly, but David made his own choices. He chose money over integrity. He chose a real estate investment over his mother's well-being. Those were his decisions, and he has to live with the consequences. But here's what I want everyone watching this to understand. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It doesn't matter if you're 68 or 88. It doesn't matter if you've spent your entire life being the peacemaker, the caregiver, the one who always puts others first. You can change. You can set boundaries. You can say no. You can fight back. Being kind doesn't mean being weak. Being generous doesn't mean being a doormat. And loving someone doesn't mean tolerating their cruelty. I won't lie and say everything is perfect now. David sends me letters sometimes, long, rambling apologies filled with excuses and justifications. He wants forgiveness. He wants things to go back to the way they were. But we can't go back. That relationship was built on an unhealthy foundation, on my willingness to accept being treated poorly in exchange for his presence in my life. I'm not willing to accept that anymore. Maybe one day, if he shows genuine change, if he does the deep work of becoming a better person, we might rebuild something. But it will be different. It will be built on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and honest communication. Or it won't be built at all. As I stand here in my garden, in the home I fought for and kept, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Not the false peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the real peace that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. My message to anyone watching this is simple. You are worthy of respect. You are worthy of dignity. You are worthy of love that doesn't require you to destroy yourself. And if the people in your life can't or won't give you that, then you have every right to walk away, to fight back, to protect what's yours. Don't wait until you've lost everything to stand up for yourself. Don't mistake someone else's greed for your own obligation. And never, ever believe that setting boundaries makes you the villain. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own destruction. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation like mine where someone you loved tried to take advantage of your kindness? What did you do? If you were in my shoes, would you have fought back the way I did, or would you have tried to reconcile? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's going through something similar. If Margaret's journey resonated with you, if her story touched your heart or opened your eyes to something you needed to see, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to stand up for themselves. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories about courage, justice, and the strength it takes to choose yourself. Remember, you deserve respect. You deserve dignity. You deserve to be treated with love, not exploited because of your love. Stand tall, set your boundaries, protect your peace, and never apologize for refusing to be a victim. Thank you for watching Margaret's story. We'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay fierce, and never forget your worth.